All right, welcome back to Side Quests 3. This is Alexander Schmidt with Wes Chance, and I have a new camera up now. So if it looks like I'm looking down, I apologize because I've got. Well, actually, I think I could move. Yeah, there we go. I can move Wes a little higher. I have two screens here, and so I can look at him, and that's helpful. That's helpful. Hey, and so today we're going to talk about My Neighbor Totoro, the fourth installment of our Side Quests series. And so My Neighbor Totoro is basically a story about two girls and their professor of archaeology father moving to a new sort of rural habitat near where their sick mother has a hospital, and them encountering not only the youthful struggles and travails of meeting a new place and new people, including a new boy, a new grandmother figure, and a new way of life, the rice planting, but also confronting a new home that's very different, that they need to turn from sort of a house full of dust and totally needing fixing up to a real home, while also running into very natural forces like flowing and destructive winds, gale force winds, as well as deep and pouring rain as well. And so they run into the difficulty of building a new culture as well as natural forces. And perhaps in the middle of that, or overarching that, is running into some spiritual growth or spiritual forces within nature, sort of a Taoist sort of message with the Totoro character and characters. In fact, there are three Totoros that we see. And so the girls are navigating this new place, which is a magical place that they don't understand. And they, very much like Chihiro from Spirited Away, need to learn to adapt to this new environment in several different ways, at several different levels of analysis. And so, well, Wes, after that little intro, I thought that we might start with the dust mites that we find in the home when they first move in. They move in and they're these sort of animated dust mites, very similar to the dust mites that we saw near the beginning of Spirited Away. And it seems like there's a clear allusion of Spirited Away back to My Neighbor Totoro, which temporally was made before Spirited Away. And the dust mites, in fact, I wanted to ask what you thought about them, while also throwing in there one thought of mine, which was, I thought it was very interesting that the father says that if the dust mites like them, that is a good thing. That it's almost as if the spirit of the house, or the spirit of the nature of that community, is manifested in the dust, or the remains or tradition of that which came before. And if that approves of them, then they're a part of things. And that perhaps the dust mites are in some way then connected to Totoro and his entourage approving of the new family as well. And so I know that's a big question, but
no, I love this movie. I think I saw it after Spirited Away. So yeah, temporally it comes before, but from my experience, I don't know if this is yours as well, I got into these movies after seeing Spirited Away. So I had that in my mind as I was watching, and so I recognized the dust beings. I think they call them soot spirits sometimes. Yes. I can't remember. But so they're clearly like soot from like burning stuff in Spirited Away. But in this one, it seems like, maybe more just like general gunk and accumulation of dirt from time and from care and from disuse, from both. That sort of clutter up the corners of the house. And then, so as to what I think they're doing there, like they seem to prepare in some way the kids for the Totoros, right? Because the dad and the neighbor woman, they both tell them a story about what these spirits are. And it seems like it's sort of a playful story that's supposed to make the kids not be afraid, which seems good. But on the other hand, it seems like the adults are aware that they're sort of playing with this truth, right? So they're not giving a full explanation of like where the dust came from. They're telling the kids a story that's going to be fun and helpful and is going to be satisfying for them, right?
That's really interesting. If I could just butt in, I
Yeah.
really love that you said that just from a pedagogical standpoint, because it seems as if what you're suggesting, like Plato suggests in the Timaeus, is that what is most helpful to a person in terms of teaching them is not giving them an encyclopedic account of all that exists objectively, but of
Right.
telling them their place within the narrative and the new things placed within the narrative so that they know how to interact with it in the best possible way, which suggests to me that the best style of teaching perhaps is leaving something out, perhaps even many things out, in order to focus on what is important from an action standpoint. And in fact, that helps them to set their perceptions, right? When they understand to categorize these dust or soot spirits not as enemies, they know, therefore they are not scary, and they need to seek their approval and therefore behave like correct young ladies around them. And so it actually makes them act completely differently, that story that they're given, while also relieving them of their well, depending on which one you're talking about, their childish fear of the unknown. And that's sort of interesting. It's almost as if they are the first embodiment in the stage of proximal development, the stage of proximal development being the stage in which you are doing something beyond your abilities that you can eventually rise to in the moment. Sort of, it's the state of learning where you're going from not having been able to do something, like hitting a PR in CrossFit. You had a 225 snatch, you go for 230. That's the area, that's the stage of proximal development. And so it's almost as if the unknown they encounter is not only natural in that it's made of this soot or dust, but is also cultural in that they have to win its approval and it exists within their home. It's a mixture of nature and society or culture there. And it's just scary enough to teach them the need to learn about that which they do not understand. And the parents are good enough to them or the parent and the grandmother figure are good enough to say, oh, that is an unknown thing which you need to win the approval of. And therefore what you need to do is approach the unknown and learn about it and to behave correctly in response to it. And so they're helping the girls to be brave, and they're rewarding them for bravery with additional information, but also by not giving them the full story. And I know I'm saying way more than I thought I would, but just again, from a pedagogical standpoint, that is, I would say, the opposite of what, say, a poorly mannered teacher or parent might say to a kid. Oh, those are just dust mites. Don't worry about them. Oh, they're in every house. It's like, how are you supposed to act then? And you get no reward for having gathered some information then, which of course, what are you going to learn as a young person that an adult, your parent or teacher, probably has not seen before? And right. And so it's as if this is also a guide to parents and teachers. And this is how you reward young people for their initial forays into the unknown. You don't say, oh, you dumb kid, they're just such spirits. You didn't discover anything new. You say, wow, oh, you found, that's very special. That's interesting. And I don't think that's lying at all. No. I think that's guiding.
No, absolutely. I think it's a fine line, but it seems like a lot of it has to do with the attitude that the adult has toward the kid, which is in this case clearly one of love and support and wanting the best for them. And so then the kids, go out and explore their new home and their neighbors and get to know them. And there are dangers that come with that, right? Because the conflict in the story has to do with getting lost, right? It's sort of like you can get lost out there. It is a real possibility. There's a while where they think she might, the younger daughter might have even drowned, right? They find a shoe. And so that's another clear allusion to the as yet unwritten story that's in Spirited Away, right? The shoe in the water. Spirited Away, it's actually an allusion back to the Totoro story temporally again. So anyway, but I just found that really, really interesting because it's like there's a tension there. Like how much do you be, telling stories? How much do you try to lead the kid out and want them to explore the world, but how much do you also want to protect them and give them the facts and sort of limit and put some blinders on them so that they're safe, because I think that's what makes it such a great movie, is it's about just that, right? From both perspectives, from the adult raising the kid and from the kid's perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's great because the idea is that you can't apply a simple ideology to the raising of a child. You can't simply say you should protect them from all danger or you should expose them to all danger willy-nilly. This shows that there's a far more sophisticated sort of path through the middle that one needs to navigate consciously as a parent or teacher. Again, with that sort of Taoist down the middle of the yin-yang message, right? Because it's like, if you think about the life of their father, he has a complicated life. His wife is sick and has been sick for a long time. He has 2 young daughters. He's just moved into a pretty crummy house, which they really have to fix up, and he's making the best of it. He also happens to have a highly difficult profession. He is a professor of archaeology. So he's got a lot going on in his life. So does even this man have the capacity to oversee his children at all moments and simply protect them? And I think that that is a good way of looking at, say, society in relation to the individual. Does society have at all times the resources in order to protect you? And should it, seen as society as just an accumulation of the conscious and unconscious individuals within it? What might be I think this movie is starting to move towards, for children and adults, what is perhaps a better safety net than a societal, say, rule or law? Perhaps consciously exploring the unknown and understanding that in life, especially in a good and meaningful life, you have to risk danger and face danger, and that is a necessary part of growing up and being an adult. And that's something that is something that one as an adult ought to teach children. And we both being teachers, it's like children love facing the unknown if they think they have a chance of gaining something from it. They love competing. They love figuring out new things. It's much better than being bored for them. And for us too, I would say. And what makes something not boring? The fact that you do not understand something about it. The fact that, like with poker, you play without your own money or without money, boring. You play with the risk of losing your own money and perhaps losing yourself in the background of that if you develop a gambling problem or can't deal with losing very well. And that's what makes it interesting and meaningful. And it's not as if these girls are simply being taught how to integrate into a society in order to lose themselves, to lose their individuality, which the psychologist suggests is a necessary part of growing up, group identification, in order to stop identifying with the parents. But that they're learning what makes a meaningful individual life as well, which is facing that which is unknown in the wake of certain tragedy. Because on the other hand, not only are they facing these difficult situations within the house, this is potentially also a symbol for the fact that they're facing the possibility of their mother's death, which means that more than anything, that would put them into the unknown. In fact, we see Satsuki, the older daughter, later in the movie in front of May, which precipitates May's running away, break down to the grandmother figure, showing why her personality had sort of gotten more and more grating, more and more like irritable with her younger sister, because she was holding something in. And what was she holding in? The fact that she couldn't face the possibility that her mother might die and how her life might change if that happened. Especially as an older sister, and then with a single father, it seems as if she recognizes that she would have to become something like a mother figure, and she's not even yet a teen, and that it's all just too much for her in that moment.
Yeah, that is the big sort of turning point, I think, in the story, where she has that breakdown and she tells off May for her kind of childish belief in everything's going to be okay, right? And it's not the first time that she's been mean to May, but it's clearly different, and May is like determined to prove her wrong, and so she goes and she takes the what is it, like a ear of corn that she's going to deliver to mom, right? And she gets lost, and everyone's very sorry, and everything, well, thankfully turns out okay, right? Because cat bus.
Cat bus, right? And I think the ear of corn is a very interesting symbol, because it, like grain, is a symbol of rebirth.
Yes.
And so why is she taking magical corn to her mother? In order to take her from the brink of death back to life.
And they write their names, their little message on the corn, which I found so cool.
Oh, and there's another connection between the cultural and the natural coming together there. And but it's not simply cultural. That is natural. The love of daughters for their mother is just as natural, I would say, as an ear of corn growing from a stalk in the ground, because that is part of human nature, which is a subset of nature as well. And so there's an accumulation of natural forces in that symbol. It's just a more powerful symbol. It's like a sword with runes on it. It's interesting because you can see the ontogenetic and phylogenetic similarities between animistic beliefs in children, sort of naturalistic beliefs in spirits and natural things, and animistic beliefs in more primitive or earlier stage cultures, right? And so you have magic words that you inscribe on this magic thing that grows out of the ground, which is this love. And the love, now I see. It must be the love which animates all nature comes through the love of humans for each other. And that's the idea of the symbol. And they couldn't articulate that, but they could understand that that's what they're trying to give to their mother. And I think that's what every child tries to give. I remember I guess this is sort of personal, but my mother tried to leave my father when I was very young one night, and I remember my sister, who was a little younger than I was, she and we were crying, and I remember exactly what I felt at that time. I was hoping that I could love my mom enough to keep her from going, and I'm sure that that's what my sister was feeling too. And it's interesting because I think part of the therapy that we use with children after they do lose somebody or there is a divorce is it's not your fault, because since a child has so little skill, all it has recourse to is to express its love in whatever way it possibly can, in the hopes that that is strong enough to make a change in the circumstance. And so, well, that itself is interesting, that what is the first thing we have recourse to as children? Well, attempting to express our love in order to affect change in the world, which, seeing as it is the 50th anniversary or 60th anniversary of, I'm sorry, my history, of MLK's death 2 or 3 days ago, right? And so the fact of trying to change the world with love coming from a child, and then being more sophisticatedly articulated by Dr. King through his philosophy of nonviolence, which of course worked, is, well, that's very interesting. And I guess well, that's a beautiful symbol. I'm sorry, I don't know where it left
in there. Well, no, yeah, get your thoughts together. But to the point about sort of a primitive or animistic sense of the numinous, the spiritual, right? I think you see that on the other hand too with Sasuke, right? As she's searching for Mei. I remember saying this one time when we played tennis. We were looking for the tennis ball or something. We were like, when you lose. When you've lost something, right? Loss is a great theme in most great works. But so when you lose a thing that you feel like you can get back, the magical thinking starts kicking in right away. It's like, okay, what have I done that has caused this to happen? What can I do to make it right? Is there something I can, appease one of the spirits somehow with a sacrifice or a promise? For me, at least, that stuff kicks in right away. It's just like, it's so, yeah, I think natural is the word that comes to mind.
Yeah, I even ascribe ill intention to nature. Some sprite must have stolen this. And in fact, with my students, and they can attest to this, especially if they see this eventually, is that in the freshman year, I blame the paper nymphs for whenever something disappears. But then we get to the Christian ages in the sophomore year, so then they become paper devils. And so it's not my fault. It's those devilish characters that are stealing this sort of thing. But I do think that there's something of value in that magical thinking, though it is primitive and that it is non-rational, and that it's like, well, there's no elf taking this or that. It does have the idea that you have to sacrifice in order to get something back that you've lost, which at the very least, if you've lost your keys, you're going to have to sacrifice some time and some energy and some conscious effort to get them back. And why would it be an elf or a sprite or a demon that took your keys? It would be your own unconscious efforts. Because where are the devils? Where are the elves? Well, they're in the same thing that produce the stories in which they exist. They're within our own minds, of course. And I mean, you even see this represented in art throughout the 20th century, like in cartoons. What do you have on your shoulders when you need to make a decision? You have a really lame angel and a really cool devil. Though I wouldn't say that that's exactly the most appropriate way of putting it, perhaps for students. Excuse me. So we talked about the dust mite some. Let's talk about Totoro's name. I'm really interested in that. So just to describe Totoro, he's like a giant, well, he's described as Hayao Miyazaki as not having any specific form because he's supposed to represent, I would imagine, this is me adding interpretation, sort of all forms of nature, that he can't perfectly be identified with one creature because he's supposed to be sort of the cuddly good aspect of nature. And he certainly is the good aspect, not the negative aspect, because the negative aspect manifests in several ways, but not through Totoro, generally through the illness of their mother, those almost earth-shattering winds that tear up a bit of the house.
That's when their dad tells them they have to laugh really loud, and they're like, okay, we'll laugh. You know, I love that part. That I think that laughter runs through all these movies too. You see that a lot in Kiki. You see that in Spirited Away.
Yeah, well, actually, let's dovetail. What do you see in the power of laughter there? Because that is the bolstering force he uses, and it's not a genuine laughter at first. He says, "Just laugh," and I mean, I think it's a great dad move that he's putting on a show of strength in order to strengthen them so that they can imitate his strength again in the face of the unknown, which is potentially dangerous to them, and he's giving them sort of a shield by which to deal with the fire of the dragon of the unknown. And so he's like, ha, 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 and then Satsuki starts, ha, 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 and then it's down to Mei, who's not convinced at first, and then ha, 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 ha.
Yeah, and, it's imitative. Yeah. It's imitative of a certain kind of ideal, right, which is everything's okay. And so we have to act, to make that the case, we have to act as if we believe in it, right? We got to believe in it first, and maybe if we don't really believe in it at first, at least we just imitate someone who we think does, who we look up to.
You know, and what I also like, oh no, go on. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, but I think it connects with Totoro's voice too, because his voice is roared, right? When we first meet him, it's the laughter of nature in some sense. And that's the wind, right? It turns out it's Totoro playing his flute up there or something, right? So
yeah, and so one other thing I wanted to notice that has been a theme that's run through our conversations, both in side quests and our contemplative conversations. And these conversations, I would say, if you are one of our followers who listens to the contemplative conversations, this is also a concentration exercise, I would say. And that is what Wes and I are always doing together. You might say that it's like two master swordsmen sharpening each other against each, or sharpening themselves against each other in order to improve their art, and hopefully in order to help anybody who listens, especially our students. And so after that great dovetail, what I like is that it also shows that a family coming together in a more tightly knit way, because Satsuki goes from outside the tub where her father and sister are to in the tub with them. They come closer together and they bond through that laughter, showing that which is the stalwart force that can keep the negative nature out, and perhaps even negative thoughts like depression thoughts because of their mother who is potentially dying, is bolstering the family and coming closer together. So almost as if what can make a natural disaster or tragedy better or bearable is coming together closer with those who are already close around you, rather than nitpicking or fighting or infighting like Achilles and Agamemnon, which is the opposite of helpful. And so
I wouldn't have thought of it that way.
I hadn't thought about it until I talked to you. So it's this concentration that's helping, but that's interesting that in coming closer together, they make that which is potentially disastrous, how is it that Peterson puts it? It's simply tragic, not catastrophic, or I'm not using the right second term, but there's something potentially even worse than tragic when humans
willfully malevolent or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's often how he puts it. And it actually makes me think about during Hurricane Katrina. So after my first year of college, Hurricane Katrina hit my college, Loyola New Orleans, and the whole city itself. And my family in Alabama, they took me in for a few days, and you know, their chimney got knocked off and their water house got messed up, and you know, the whole city was messed up where we were staying. But everybody around me had such a good attitude. They dealt with hurricanes before, and they're just great people. And I would say that it was still a really positive experience being with my cousins down there, and their father and their mother. And because even though something very dangerous was happening that could potentially have major consequences, in coming closer together with them, it's almost as if it were almost, it improved our relations, and we could rebuild that city. I didn't stay around to rebuild very much, but I did help clear off their not their garden, but their land. And well, it's interesting because again, I'm seeing what's running through this Totoro is you can't protect people from everything. And perhaps even when you do try and protect people from everything, you deny them the richness of experience that makes a life meaningful, because in dealing with a tragic circumstance or the power of the power of nature, which you cannot transcend, you have to learn to endure it with others, or how to transform a situation from tragic into heroic or something like that.
I'm going to say the phrase here that comes to mind: shield of Achilles, right?
Very good.
You don't give them the normal. You don't give them a regular old shield. You give them the shield of Achilles, because that encompasses.
And the shield of Achilles is a proper life philosophy, right? Because the shield of Achilles, I say Achilles because of Lattimore, but Achilles has both. It's encompassed by the ocean as one limit and the stars in the middle, so the circumference in the middle. And so Augustine, when he says God is a circle whose circumference is everywhere, or rather whose circle is everywhere and circumference is nowhere, I can see that there because he's boundless, because he's information rich and infinite in that way, which is beautiful. But the shield of Achilles is an appropriate way of looking at life. There's marriage, there's war, there's death, there are trial courts, there's nature that you have to contend with, and the gods, and they help in differing ways. And it's a rich understanding of all that can happen to you in a categorical way in life. And so when things happen to you that are generally negative, they will not crush or destroy you and your worldview, precisely because you understand that this is the sort of thing that can always happen to humans. And that therefore gives you the opportunity to do the best thing a human can do, which is to rise up to the situation and to act heroically and courageously. Yeah. And so to make oneself an object of imitation to other humans, because you cannot protect people from the necessary sufferings in their life. What you can do is give them the shield of Achilles so that they can endure it and pass on that capacity to endure it. So in fact, when you just try and protect somebody and make them weak, you are harming not only that person, but also humanity by taking a potential exemplar of the capacity to be heroic away from us.
Yeah. In the movie, I think it's the umbrella, right? It's like sort of the symbol of that, right? It's like she gives an umbrella to Totoro, but she also gets one from the neighbor boy, right? He lends her the umbrella. I love that part.
Yeah, and I love that part too, because it's interesting, because it's all, if Totoro, who I never finished describing, who's like a giant badger, rabbit, soft, cuddly, perfect plush doll figure. He's very soft and cuddly. And in fact, when both girls trip and fall, yes, Wes is holding up his cat right now. When both kids trip and fall by going down a hidden pathway, that then they trip over a branch. They trip. They fall. There's a fall. They fall onto the belly of Totoro, who's sleeping. It's like they fall into their own inner natures, or the positive aspect of their inner natures, because he's, of course, soft and cuddly, though he does roar very powerfully. And so there are hints and intimations of the negative nature with him. But I would say that,
is freaky. I mean, Catbus is terrifying. I think, there's clearly more than a little bit of a hint. When it's got like those little rats that hang down as the headlight. Yeah.
Yeah, Catbus does look a little sly. He does give a sly look to those girls, which I guess we should mention the sort of cracked idea that Satsuki and Mei were representative of two girls who were involved in a murder in Japan. And there was a thought that perhaps consciously or unconsciously that Hayao Miyazaki was was trying to represent these two girls post-murder navigating their way through the afterlife. But I recall that you and I both found that reading to be somewhat, or that watching, that interpretation to be somewhat limited, especially in the context of the end. If you watch the credits of Totoro, you'll see that actually their mother does end up coming home, and they end up having a third child, which they interact with. And so, I mean, potentially you could really macabrely try and say that they stay as resident spirits in the home in order to guide that child if you really wanted to push it. But I don't understand why there would be included sort of a progression in their lives if they were supposed to be representative of people who died.
I guess I don't go along with the allegorical reading of things in general. Like, it's kind of interesting and a fun thing to play around with, but it doesn't really impress me as all that satisfying. I just find it I find a more naive watching of it a lot more fun and interesting. So, yeah.
All right, so we wanted to talk about Totoro in his first naming. So it's not Satsuki, the older sister, but rather Mei who first finds him.
Yeah.
She finds him by going through an underbrush and a hidden trail that she finds while chasing a semi-transparent small Totoro. So there's a semi-transparent one, and then there's a slightly larger one, and then there's the large, big Totoro. So there's a Trinitarian aspect in this, unconsciously added in there. There's a triple form, and they're all isomorphic, right? They have the same form. They're of different sizes, however. In Dante's Trinity, all the volumes are the same size, but they're different colors. So they're still isomorphic as well. So all these Totoros, they look the same even though they're of different sizes. And the first one that's seen is transparent, which indicates to me that Totoro is something of an image of one's inner nature, or one's inner nature as representative of nature in of itself, and that Mei first sees faint intimations of it, the semi-transparent one, which leads her into a dark underbrush, which gets her eventually to the larger Totoro. So it's almost as if in following the faint intimations or imaginary images within her head, she comes closer to her own inner nature. And so when she first runs into this Totoro, what does she do as a good human? Well, regardless of whether you're Jewish, Christian, or Taoist, the first thing she does is asks its name. She needs to name it. What are you? And so it's at first asleep too, which I think is significant in some way, which I should ask you what you think the significance of that is, that perhaps
clearly it's a precursor to Snorlax is the main thing. But since we don't know about Pokemon in the 80s or whenever this movie came out, we have to ask it its name, and we wake it up. And I mean, it's sleeping because it's sort of like, it's like this unconscious force, potential, if you like, the potential that sleeps within a person, within a society, whatever, and certainly within nature. And then she's like, pretty soon she's just bouncing on his stomach and playing with him and waking him up and stuff.
So she asks, "What's your name?" And he sort of gives her this apathetic look, like, "Human, you don't need to name me," sort of idea. But then he, in like 3 sort of grunts, goes, "Toe, row," and he roars that row, and she tries to say it again, and then he repeats himself, and then she goes, "Totoro," and he sort of rolls his eyes at that, which I thought was perfect, because it's as if in her as a human trying to encompass what he is in language, she is sure to fall short, which is actually repeated by Dante at the top of the Paradiso. He says, in trying to encompass the full beauty of the top of heaven in language, certainly he will fall short. And so again, we see that image of falling short in trying to encapsulate something in word or story, but still being necessary in order to help it. So it is an encapsulation of perhaps the essence of Totoro, but not the entirety of Totoro, to make what he is communicable to somebody else. And even though she cannot communicate the full force of nature, she can represent what it is that she is talking about, even though she doesn't summon that full force in describing it. And I would say that that's actually very similar to the Perseus and Medusa myth, where he uses the reflection of nature, the shield, as an object of culture in order to defend himself from the full onslaught of nature. and that is in fact why we tell stories to students, especially like traumatic stories, like the things they carried by Tim O'Brien, or even what I teach, like the Iliad, with people dying and getting their livers hit, and then dying in pain while screaming. It's like,
Yeah.
why do we tell stories about this? In order to traumatize our students? No, in order to make them stronger during actual circumstances in their lives, which could potentially traumatize them, which is, again, I would say something we're missing in both psychological efforts and pedagogical efforts right now. We are so afraid of traumatizing our students and our children that we are forgetting that the whole point of subjecting them to these stories is in order to toughen them up to deal with the traumatizing aspects of life, which we cannot keep them from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's stories out there of little girls who get killed or whatever, this sort of thing is, but it seems like the work of the artist is to take all of that suffering and sort of make a poem or a movie or a work, whatever kind of work of art, out of it, right? And to present it in a way that doesn't demean or diminish the suffering, but gives you some way to encounter it, like you said, with some kind of security within a certain set of language or things that you can say about it, even if you don't fully encapsulate it. And yet it leaves you free, right, to interpret the world for yourself, right? Because you're never going to get the encapsulation of what is, much less in in 3 syllables. So, but
another good 3.
Yeah. Well, so Totoro, he wakes up, they play, and then when they find her later, right, they go looking for her. This is the first time she's lost, and they're like very worried, sort of semi-worried at least. And they find her asleep, right? She's been asleep, and she tells them about this story. But the dad is most interested in the tree, it seems like. And so then we get the story about the tree, and I know you wanted to kind of delve into that a little bit, so maybe we should kind of close with this. The tree's got like a ring of little like prayer flags around it, I think, or something like that. It's huge, it's enormous, and it's like the place of Totoro, right? It's like the if Totoro is most identified with anything, it's with the growing of the trees up out of the seeds, which hold their potential, or something like that.
Yeah, and so there's not only the tree with which he is first identified, but there is an attempt by the 2 girls later on. Speaking of potential and realizing it, they plant seeds for trees.
Yeah.
And then they are told that if they try some sort of ritual dance in front of the trees, which they are shown by Totoro himself, so it's as if nature embodies itself in ritual dance, in order for humans to understand that which is natural to them is the embodiment of their nature, in the same way that plants embody their nature by growing. And as if in partaking of that which is natural to us around them. And it's funny because plant people will often tell you to talk to your plants and what is most natural to humans, using the logos, talking, communicating. And it's almost as if in the presence of something being natural, other things will be natural in an imitative way too, though perhaps it works backwards and forwards, and that perhaps we like being in things like gardens because in seeing other things being natural, it helps us to be ourselves natural. And in fact, what do you often do in a garden? You contemplate, or you reflect. And so what is it that you're reflecting? Exactly, perhaps the beauty of nature, and in doing that which is most natural to you. But yes, I did. So these girls seem to be in a dream state like Dante. And what they do with Totoro is they sort of shape their ideal, right? Because in this dream, their plants, their trees start to grow, and then they grow more, and then they grow huge, and then they all grow together. They integrate, right? And they become a giant great tree. And so it's like Yggdrasil from the Norse mythology, or either of the 2 major trees from Genesis, or like the Kabbalistic Sephiroth tree. But so what is this tree? Well, it seems that there's a representation of the great potential in all nature and its connection to one's individual potential then. Because by them cultivating their own personal trees, which represent their natures, they are helping to add to the great tree, which is all of human nature. And so Totoro shows them the great ideal of culture or society and all that it can be if everybody within it builds themselves up, if they harness their own potential, if they grow their own tree, if they tend to their own garden. And in so raising this tree up as an ideal, he also invites them to do that which is most natural to him. So he creates the winds with his flute, right? So he's a pan spirit in that respect as well. And he teaches them also to sort of play that sort of flute, right? And they're not very good at it at first, like he is. And so to learn to harness your inner nature, or to embody your potential, or make it, transform it into actuality, takes what? It takes not only imagining it, but practicing, in order not only to transform yourself in accordance with the ideal, but also to transform the ideal in accordance with yourself. Much like what happens in the interplay between Dante and Beatrice, his like wisdom or ideal at first in the Paradiso. He learns something new, becomes more conscious, she becomes more beautiful. He learns something new, she becomes more beautiful. Each stage of heaven, until she disappears and is replaced by his final shaped ideal, Bernard, who's masculine, is a process of him getting closer to his ideal, and his ideal getting clearer to him the closer he gets to it. And these children are right at the beginning of that process, it looks like, and they are embodying it correctly, as shown by the fact that Totoro is actually being a helpful spirit to him, because perhaps if they weren't doing that, his fearful aspect might take more hold. But right before we go, we got to talk about Cat Bus a little bit. Or no, what were you going to say? What were you going to say? I can't believe that any person who listens to us and has also viewed this movie will let us get away with not talking about Cat Bus for at least a minute.
Yeah.
That hermetic figure, I would say, that container as well, like an alchemical container. But yeah, what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
Just, I think it was about, okay, so I think that the dad or the grandma or both mentioned how they used to be able to see the spirits, and then they can't anymore. But that it's very fortunate that the kids can. And I was thinking about how that goes along with what you're saying, right? Like as you actually embody your potential, right, you also lose something.
Yes.
You lose those avenues of imagination to an extent start to shut, and as you sort of specialize along one particular branch or something. But at a certain point, you can also then produce, right, your own kids, or the kids that you interact with, or whatever, the people around you, however you like to take, however literally, right, you sort of pass on those things, and you get to see them grow anew, so that the whole thing sort of continues on. So the tree and its seeds does seem like a great image for all that process of potential maturation, and then the new generation.
And we have a Western children's story about that too, the Polar Express, right? Where this child, he goes and he meets Santa, the top of the dominance hierarchy, or the god, very similar to, or the old wise, the positive patriarchal figure, you might say. And what does he give to the young man? Well, he gives evidence of his existence, a bell that rings from his sleigh. Well, what happens to the bell as he ages, as he becomes less imaginative, as he starts to embody his potential? Well, it becomes fainter and fainter to him. And so it's interesting because, I mean, we could portray that negatively, I think, but I think you're exactly correct to say that one gives up the infinite possibilities of childhood in order to become something actual in the world. And in fact, I think I'll tell the story soon of Donkey, and maybe we can end with this actually. And I'm sorry that we're not going to talk much about Cat Bus, but and I've talked about this with you before, and but there's an old story, and I heard this when I was very young in at Kittredge Magnet School for High Achievers, and so I don't recall even what tradition this came from. I vaguely recall that it was some African one, so I apologize for that not being very specific, but I was very young. And so there was a time in the beginning of all things when all creatures could do all things and choose to be what manner of creature they wished. And so those that liked to fly would fly and would become birds, and those that liked to swim would swim and become fish. And those that liked to be strong would roar and become lions, or any of the various powerful creatures. But the greatest of all creatures to exist was Donkey. And Donkey could roar louder than the lions, could fly higher than the birds, and could swim deeper than the fish. And so man came along one day and said, Donkey, you are such an impressive figure. Come, work my land, help me till my yard, and I'll pay you great riches. And so Donkey was very honored by this request by man, and was also, wanted to put some money in his pocket because a donkey's got to eat. And so he did this for years on years, but over the time that he was working for man, and perhaps we see in this our own selves as we go from children to working men, Donkey had less and less time to fly, and less time to swim, and less time to roar. So he would sort of imagine that he was working on transforming that potential into actuality while he wasn't. And so one day a lion shows up, and the lion roars at Donkey, thinking itself fierce and powerful. And the man and Donkey thinks, oh, well, this lion is in for it. He doesn't know who he's messing with. And when he puffs up and gets ready to belt out, he lets out a powerful yee-haw. And the lion looks on with pity at Donkey, the only creature not to have become anything, and thus the only creature fully enslaved to man, and thinks, what a pathetic sight you've become, Donkey. And so in not becoming any of the one things he could have been best at, he fails to become anything at all. And so that potential that we have as children does not last forever. And I think that's a problem in our interpretation. We ask, why should we become this and not this? It's like, because if you don't become one or the other, you'll never become anything, because your potential is either transformed into actuality or it disappears. Just like one's capacity to hear the bell off Santa's sleigh and to see the dust mites as well. And I mean, I would say that actually sort of in a figuro-litero way seems true, because I mean, if you've seen any little kids lately, they're just running around saying all sorts of crazy things and talking about their stuffed animals and playing games out of nowhere. It's like they're picking things out of the air, which we could never see, which is part of the delight of dealing with young people.
Yeah, but the idea that you get to a certain point where you still, but that they suddenly go to try and do it, and that they no longer are able, right? So it's something that you see with children, but I think on the other end of the spectrum also with people as they age out of certain abilities and things.
Yeah, well, that's very good. It's funny. And one thing I really love about what we're doing here, Wes, just to sort of make it a little casual before we sign off, is just that one criticism I always heard growing up, we're both now in our early 30s, is, what's the point of still watching these kids movies? Or, these movies are just kids movies. And I don't understand what that means exactly, because I would say, like Plato, the art that we portray to our children is the most important art, because it shapes the people they're going to be. And so these are the works of art that we should precisely be understanding and articulating the values within, because we show them to our children, indicating that our children derive their values from these works of arts, especially the children that don't have religious backgrounds as well, and books in the home. So we clearly believe that these works of art are in some way helpful to the transformation and building of the character of our youths. And so I think it is more important to understand exactly what the messages are underlying these works of art. And I do not think in any way they are shallow. I think that they are as shallow as your mind is. And the deeper that you move into them, the farther you will find, or the deeper you dig, the closer to the deepest roots that bind our culture together we will find, because we create new citizens, new people, new enculturated humans through the transmission of these stories into them. The transmissions of the stories into them transforms their character into the sorts of people that can be helpful and good and understand the reasons why. And I think so. So I think that to say a story is simply a children's story is exactly the wrong way of looking at it. It's more that it is a children's story, and clearly there is something powerful and transformative within it, which we would do well to understand.
agree. It's like, if they're trees, you have to water them, something like that, right? You have to cultivate that person for them to grow up well. And stories are a huge part of that.
Well, right. And well, so I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Are you coming out with a new Bookworm game? Speaking of, Bookworm games. And so are you coming out with a new episode tomorrow?
I hope so. Yeah, I got to work on it, but that's the plan.
All right. Well, great. Well, this has been SideQuest 004. That was our crack at Totoro. And if anybody watching this wants us to give any more analysis or flesh out any of the points that we've given during this concentration, please let us know. You can contact Mr. Weschanz. Mr. Weschanz, where can we find your work, by the way?
Yeah, you can. I think it's on YouTube, most of those things. You can also find my blog. It's called New School Notes, all one word, word.blogspot.com.
Very good. And Bookworm Games is available not only on Anchor, but on YouTube now due to the efforts of your wonderful fiance, Stephanie, right?
That's right. She did that.
All right, good. And well, this has been our fourth crack at this. And as usual, thank you very much, Mr. Weschanz. I love talking with you. And I suppose we should tell the viewers what we were going to watch for next time. And I had a sort of divided spirit about this because I know that Howl's Moving Castle is temporally one of the latest works of Hayao Miyazaki, and that, of course, Princess Mononoke comes before. But I was tempted to suggest that, but I do think that Princess Mononoke ought to be the next one that we talk about, seeing as that is, alongside Spirited Away, the most famous one. But I should ask you, which way would you like to go? I'm open to either.
Oh, I kind of thought you'd want to say Porco Rosso.
Well, so the one thing about Porco Rosso is that it's Studio Ghibli, but it's not Hayao Miyazaki as much as I love it. But well, would you like to? We could deviate from Hayao Miyazaki to a Studio Ghibli form. I mean, there is a lot in Porco Rosso that I think is very good, and I very much do love that movie. Yeah,
it's cool either way. I mean, they're all great. But I kind of think we should do Porco Rosso next. Yeah.
Okay. Well, where there's a will, there's a way. Yes. Well, okay. Well, then Porco Rosso for next time. Cool. All right.
Well, thanks.
Thank you. See everybody later.